Estamos en la serie internacional de tiempo de mercadeo en los Estados Unidos. Hoy hablaremos con Noel Capon, uno de los más famosos profesores en la Universidad de Columbia y uno de los mejores consultores de la materia. Ya regresamos.
Well, good evening. Welcome to my program.
It's good to see you.
Well, I have to take advantage of your acceptance to my invitation, and you just wrote a book about marketing for the 21st century. What's new on marketing?
What's new? Well, I think there are a lot of things that are new, but there are also a set of things that are fundamental that don't change. I think the fundamentals don't change. What's new, I think, are a number of issues. One would be the rise of the internet, which has led to a whole set of changes with respect to communications and also to distribution issues. There are some big changes in that area. There are some other big changes in the way that B2B companies deal with their customers. Those are a couple of the major changes I can think. But there's also a lot of stuff that stays the same or evolves.
So the only thing that we could say is really new is the way we do marketing, because other than that, the fundamentals are the same, but the tools are different.
But it depends on what you call marketing. You see, from my perspective, there are a set of half a dozen imperatives that are marketing. And the things that change, a lot of things that change are in the big scheme of things. I mean, they're important and people spend a lot of money on them, but they're only parts of marketing. Would you like me to talk about what
yeah, we're going to talk about the 6 imperatives of marketing that you like to talk about. But I have another question, because Kevin Roberts, a former CEO of Saatchi & Saatchi, just wrote something about the death of marketing. Do you think marketing is dead?
Maybe that sells books. And people in marketing who may be a little concerned about that, a little nervous, will run off and buy the book. No, I don't think marketing is dead.
It won't be dead.
No, well, but remember, you're talking about a person who is head of a very successful advertising company, Saatchi & Saatchi, and what he's talking about is communication, and communication has changed. The markets are fragmented. The old system for a consumer products company to address customers with lots of mass advertising, that isn't dead, but that's certainly changed. We've got fragmented markets, we've got all sorts of cable TV outlets, we've got the internet. So tremendous. So what would be dead is if you don't modify your communications vehicles, your communications strategy as the world changes, and keep on doing the same old thing, you will be dead. I would agree with that. But if in fact you then make the modifications to take advantage of the new technologies and the new ways of segmenting markets, then I think you're going to be fine.
What do you consider the goal of marketing? What's the marketing's goal? Sales, or to form and create and maintain a customer, or anything else?
The first question you have to ask is what is the function of a business? And the business function...
David used to say that.
Yeah, well, it's still true. The business function typically is to create shareholder value for the owners of the company. So how do you do that? The way you do that is make profits today and promise profits tomorrow. The company survives, grows, and shareholders get very happy.
And what about non-profits?
Well, that's a very different issue. I happen to believe that, in fact, operating in a non-profit is somewhat more complicated, because in a for-profit company, the bottom line is clear. It's profits and shareholder value. For the non-profit, it's not at all clear what the goal is. So one of the things that non-profits have to work on is what in fact is their goal. And really profit then becomes a constraint. You've got to have enough profit to keep going to your goal, but you've got to figure out the goal. And that's often very complicated. And company and not-for-profits change over time. For example, there was a not-for-profit, I'm blanking on the name now, whose core goal was to eliminate polio. And then along came the Salk vaccine, which in fact eliminated polio. So what does that organization do? The organization now has to sort of figure out some other goal for itself. Whereas in the for-profit area, that's not an issue. It's profits and shareholder value. But the question becomes, what asset do you need to be able to make profits and improve shareholder value, and that's customers. So the core issue for the firm is to create, to grow customers.
Right.
And marketing is the function that's most associated with doing that. There are other functions in the organization, obviously do lots of things, but marketing, in effect, has the lead role in the design.
That's what
of
Peter
the firm.
Drucker used to say too. That marketing and innovation are the only two functions of any kind of organization.
That's what Peter absolutely
right.
says. Marketing and innovation. That's all. That's what it's about. And what he means by that is that if the marketing people don't do their job, don't understand what customers want, so that the company can deliver it, then you do not create, retain, and grow customers,
Absolutely.
and ultimately you go out of business. So
Absolutely.
that makes marketing a somewhat different function from many others.
Then, Noel, with these too many tools that we now have in marketing, how is it affecting the work we usually do? You were talking about communication, but then real-time marketing has become another issue. Is that something that is going to affect it much?
One of the issues has to do with the human resources of the people that do marketing. So, for example, now we have the ability to collect an awful lot of data on customers, for example. The ability to do that would stretch the capabilities of what we would call most traditional marketers. So that the marketing departments are going to have to hire and find a set of people that can, for instance, manage, develop customer databases, sort those customer databases, do deep dives in them to secure insight for their firm. So I think there's some interesting change in terms of the sorts of people who will be important to companies going forward. And then with respect to the web, for example, there's a lot of technology involved in getting your company's name to come up early on a website and on Google and Bing and things like that. So I think there's a whole issue of what are the set of competencies that people involved in the marketing area will need to know. And that's certainly changing, I think, significantly.
Before we get into the 6 imperatives, what would you say is the most important thing for marketers?
I think the most important thing is to continue to keep their eye on the customer, today's customers and tomorrow's customers. I think also to keep their eye on competition, to understand what competitors are doing, because at the end of the day, the firm succeeds by delivering value, but delivering value is not enough. It's got to be delivering greater value than the other guys in the competition. So that means we have to keep very, very close tabs on what customers are looking for and on what competitors are doing. But I think a very important issue is one that I'll talk about in a second, is to what I call monitor and control, to be very clear what you're doing, to be very clear about what the results of your actions are, so you can feed that back into what you do going forward. In fact, I like to sort of think of marketing and business as a whole as sort of one continuous experiment. The successful companies are always trying new things, not across their whole organization, but in different parts of the organization. Some don't work, forget it, move on to the next thing. But if something works, then you spread that out and move forward.
Now we're going to go to a commercial break and we'll be right back. Okay?
Okay.
All right. Vamos a un corte de comerciales y ya estamos con ustedes. One more question before we go into the 6 imperative, because you just said competition, competitors. Right. I remember Peter Drucker again saying that competitors now have to be looked from 3 points of view. Direct competitors, indirect competitors, which don't know the same thing that a company does or an organization does, but what they do can be replaced by somebody else. And invisible competition, which is the competition that we have in the web, because we don't see it. I mean, physically, we don't have a competitor in front of us in the same place or whatever, and that's more difficult. What do you think about it?
I think it's a very, very important issue to understand two things. First of all, who your competitors are today and who they're going to be tomorrow. because the ones you have tomorrow may not be the same ones as you have today. And if you don't think forward, then you can get in trouble. Certainly, one competitor group I talk about is direct competitors. These are companies that are sort of like yours. They have similar technologies to yours. Some of your people may have worked for them, and vice versa. And over time, sometimes you win and sometimes they win. But they are not the ones that put you out of business. There are two. I have a slightly different classification, but certainly with indirect competitors. These are the companies that offer the similar values, but with very different technology. So, for example, if we consider Kodak,
Yes.
the major photo company, for years it fought back and forth with Fuji around the world, and sometimes Fuji won and sometimes Kodak won. But Kodak is in tremendous trouble today, not because of Fuji, but because of Sony and Hewlett-Packard and other electronic cameras, or even moving into cell phones. So it's a totally different technology offering a similar value and image, but maybe better, maybe quicker, and so forth. The other type of competitor, I think, is what I call supply chain competitors. That you have a supplier that supplies you with some raw material, your firm does something to that and then sells it on to a customer. But if that supplier decides, well, I could do what you're doing, that supplier can jump past you and serve the customer. Or the reverse of that is the buyer that's buying from you says, I don't want to buy from you, I want to buy from your supplier, or I can do the things that you're doing. Now, with your notion of invisible competitors, I'm not sure how invisible they are. I mean, I think that they're competitors we didn't have before, but I would often consider them indirect competitors. So, for example, in the United States, Barnes & Noble has been for a long time a major bookstore. They knew more about books and book selling than anybody else. But then along came Amazon. So it's internet, but it's a different technology doing essentially the same thing. So I would think you could talk about web competitors, and a lot of competitors, of course, they don't have they're invisible in the sense they don't have a physical presence. I guess that would be.
Like somebody says, Amazon is becoming the Walmart of the web.
I think there's no question on that about that. They sell many products. They've moved. What they did is to develop their whole system and technology around books, and then it was on the CDs, and they've moved that out, pushing the envelope of the products that they sell and their ways of doing business. Interestingly, Jeff Bezos, the head of Amazon, one of his first jobs after leaving Princeton was working for one of my colleagues at Columbia for a couple of years before he went to Wall Street. Yeah.
Okay, now let's get into the 6 imperatives that you mentioned.
Okay.
What's the first one?
Okay, the first one. Can I just back into that and say there's something we call a market orientation, which is a broad sort of notion that carries on from what we talked about earlier, that the core job of the company, not just marketing, is to create and grow customers.
Yes.
And so no matter what part of the organization you're in, you've got to understand that that's the overall direction the company has to go. So that's sort of a broad issue. The imperatives these are what I call the marketing jobs that have to be done. Mostly they'll be done within the marketing department, but not necessarily. The first one is to figure out where you're going to play. The first one is to figure out what are the markets that you are going to address. Because the notion is that you have limited resources and you've got to select those very carefully. Equally, you've got to decide which ones to get out of. So an interesting example would be Intel. That Intel, for example, was founded. They were going to be a memory chip company, and they were a memory chip company, very successful for many years. But they also had on the side a small part that did microprocessors. When their memory chip business came under tremendous pressure from the Japanese, such that the prices landed in the US were less than Intel's cost. Andy Grove made this really momentous decision for Intel to get out of that business. So they got out of memory chips and they made a very big bet on microprocessors, and in fact, of course, have done very well. So the first key imperative is figure out where you're going to play, which overall markets and technologies are the ones that suit your business, and which ones you want to leave. Because if you spread yourself too thin, and with increased competition now, many companies have spread themselves too thin. They've got in trouble, and they're cutting back in the sense of figuring out exactly what they're good at and focusing your efforts there. So the first imperative is decide where you want to play.
That doesn't mean that it has to be in the same place where you are located. I mean, if you're in New York, your market doesn't have to be New York. Could be Europe, or could be because of the internet and all the tools that we have today. So there's no natural market like people used to say before.
I think that's certainly true from a geographic point of view. We used to think of multinationals, for example,
Yes.
big companies. These were big companies that had lots of resources that could go out around the world. Little companies had to stay home. That's certainly not the case with the web now. You get a decent website out, and you can send stuff all over the world. And many companies do that.
Yeah, it can be small companies, and they sell throughout the world.
Yeah, in fact, my little company, which produces my textbooks, we sell all over. We have Chinese editions and Russian editions and Latin American.
Yeah, I just saw that. So that's a good point now, that there is no natural market. Could be anywhere.
Right.
Okay, what is the second?
The second is really the notion of market segmentation. That in any market, you have to figure out what the segments are, and then second of all, you have to choose. Let me give you a nice example of how important this issue is. Now, for most of your viewers will know that, will intuit at least, that there have historically been two market segments in the market for automobile rental, for renting cars. Typically a business person segment and a leisure segment. And the leading players have been in the world globally, and in the US have been Hertz and Avis for the business section, and then a lot of others like Budget or Advantage, Dollar actually for leisure. And people thought that those were the segments.
Rent-a-wreck.
Rent-a-wreck. That's Rent-a-wreck. That was obviously one for the not for the business segment, for the leisure segment. And then along came another company and said, no, there's another segment. There's let's call it car in the garage segment. In other words, you have a crash, right? And your car has to go to the garage. You need a car for a few days, or your car has to go in for a service, or for whatever reason, your car is not available. You need one for a short period of time. And a company called Enterprise figured that out. And of course, in that segment, you've got very different decision makers. In the business segment, it's probably the business person or the secretary or the personal assistant. In the family segment, it's either the husband or the wife. In the car in the garage segment, it may well be the insurance company. Or another important person is the garage mechanic. You bring your car in, you say, what do I do for a new one? The garage mechanic says, why don't you try Enterprise? Enterprise grew that segment such that they became larger than Hertz and larger than Avis.
And you know what calls my attention about Enterprise?
Go ahead.
That they don't work 25 around the clock. They close from 8, 9 o'clock in the evening until 5 a.m.
Oh, is that true?
Yeah,
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, while the others work 24 hours a day.
Yeah, interesting.
Enterprise doesn't.
Well, the Enterprise was very successful in focusing on insurance companies and so forth. So as soon as that crash comes, and you have that crash, heaven forbid you don't, but if you do, the insurance adjuster is there to call Enterprise and get your car. So they, a few years, right just before the recession, they were buying, I think the number is something like 800,000 cars a year. They were the largest car customer in the world. But the point about it is their success is not due to the type of car, because everyone they wanted the same
Yes.
car. It's because they identified a segment. And that's the critical issue. And now in the United States, we have another segment that's developing. The issue being that with all of those car companies, the minimum amount of time to rent is 24 hours. You have to rent for a day. But let's suppose you want to go and visit your grandmother for the evening or go shopping. You only want a car for a few hours. So there's a company called Zipcar, where you belong to Zipcar. You pay like $50 a year to belong. You go onto the web, using the web. You find out where their cars are located around the city. You sign on for the Zipcar. You're going to pick it up at 8 o'clock and return it at 12 o'clock. You have a little credit card thing that lets you in your car and you're away. And they're in many cities, and I think they now have competition. I think Hertz has a similar sort of offering. The point is that these, even though the rental market is mature, it's been mature for many years. Here's First Enterprise and now Zipcar come along, identify different segments.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Right. We're going to go to a commercial break and we'll be right back to close this first program, okay? All right. Ya volvemos para terminar el primer. I think segmentation is becoming a real issue now because we have chronological markets, as somebody says, because the competition and the amount of products available to the markets has made the segmentation process more difficult. Social classes, chronological issues, things like that. Don't you think so?
I think segmentation, you're absolutely right, that segmentation is a very, very complicated issue. But if you don't get that right,
oh yeah, absolutely.
You've got trouble. So,
yeah, we have to be right about that.
Yeah.
There's no question about it.
So if you go back to your question earlier, the issue we talked about skills, you've got to have people that are able to work with customer data to be able to figure out what those segments are. I think that's absolutely crucial. That's another area of technological expertise, if you like, that's coming into market.
Right.
Absolutely right.
Social classes and things like that, you know, a lot of things to take into account.
Oh yeah, and certainly, I mean, there may well be for companies opportunities in places where you wouldn't think. So, for example,
you know what, Noel? We have to leave it here because we're running out of time. But we'll leave it for next week, ¿okay?
Okay, sure.
All right. Bueno, se nos acabó el tiempo por la noche de hoy. Entonces, quedamos con segmentación para la semana entrante continuar con Noel Capon, ¿ok? Buenas noches para todos y muchísimas gracias.